Hey, welcome back to the Jesus Thoughts podcast. My name is Pastor Amie. We are in episode 16 in a season called What Child Is This?, where we're trying to learn to know who this Christ child is better. So people ask me all the time, are other people from other religions going to heaven? I loathe eternal destiny questions. That is way out of my authority or pay grade. Or a similar question is, do people from other religions hear from God too? We aren't able to have the necessary complicated and nuanced discussion about world religions in the next 5 minutes. But the scripture today and the theme today give us incredible insight into it. Today's title, King of the Jews, was something Jesus never once used to talk about himself with. It's a title other people gave him. And in chapter 2 of the book of Matthew, we meet some astrologers. They call them magi from the East, from other cultures, other countries, other religions. These Babylonian astrologers were those who were known to have gained special insight about world affairs through their study of the planets and stars. They could have been Persian or Zoroastrian priests, or even from Egypt. We just don't know. Anyway, these were non-Jewish people, outsiders to the faith of the God of Israel. They'd call them pagans. Visitors like these were extremely common in the ancient world. They mostly had political motives. I mean, this is long been an important part of international relations. When you hear of a monarch of a neighboring empire or country or nation being born, you want to get on the next monarch's good side. So you travel or send important dignitaries to give them gifts. It's a way to honor them. It's very customary. This happened so many times in the Old Testament. Even outside of the Bible, we get a recorded piece of history of magi from the East traveling to visit Nero about 60 years after this. But here's what's different about this story. These particular magi didn't hear about the birth of the new monarch, the new king, through any sort of official or formal palace announcement. They deduced it from their study of the stars. They had divine guidance only. Did you hear that? These people from other religions had divine guidance that brought them to this Christ child. How huge is that? In this early Christian text, this author, Matthew, and the Christian community, from their perspective at least, are claiming here and giving an example of how the God of Israel can speak to and guide those of other religions, giving them special truth and insight into something that many of God's own people were clueless about. The Christian God can speak to and guide those of other religions, giving them special truth and insight that sometimes God's own people don't know yet. I love that this is included in early Christian writings. How's that for a dose of humility for those who are already part of God's people? And furthermore, these Eastern or Zoroastrian or Persian or Babylonian, wherever they came from, visitors from the East were receptive to the voice of God. How many times are God's own people, even in scriptures, they're deaf to the voice of God. They're stubborn. They don't listen and they don't respond. So to you as a Christian, if you are a Christian, never doubt God's ability to speak to anyone, no matter how far away you might think they are from the faith or from this God. And for the love of God, stop hating on people from other religions. Stop trying to decide where people go after they die. You don't get a say in anyone else's eternal destiny. I also think that this particular example is a powerful example of what people in the Wesleyan tradition call prevenient grace. This idea that before any of us know any of the Bible stories, before we are baptized, before we even know up from down, before we even know our own name, God's grace is given to us, is chasing after us, is made available to us. So when Jesus was born, these magi came where they would, to the palace in Jerusalem to ask about this newborn child. They said in Matthew chapter 2, verse 2, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews. We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Their own practice led them to the Christ child. And King Herod at the time was like, I didn't just have a baby. What's going on here? And this Herod was very politically threatened, so much so that he wanted to go find this imposter, what he considered an imposter, and murder him, which history tells that this was very common for King Herod, this particular King Herod, to murder people who were a threat to his reign, even members of his own family. And through God's leading, these magi make it to Mary and Jesus, and they bring Jesus the gifts they had intended to give, and they worshiped him. And then they go home. Herod tries to kill Jesus, but he's not able to. And the only other time that this title is used of Jesus, we zoom to the very end of his life. Again, very, very political scene. In the trial, Pilate asks Jesus point blank, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus responds by saying, "That's what you are saying." Again, he doesn't call himself a king of the Jews. And then we see a scene where the Roman soldiers are mocking Jesus, it says. They make a crown out of thorns and sink it into his head just before he is crucified, with the blood dripping down his head. And they kneel before him to make fun of him with this title. And they say, "Hail, King of the Jews." Such a different picture than these other pagan people in the beginning of Jesus' life, genuinely bowing down to honor him. And these soldiers even took their game one step further, and they created a sign that said, "King of the Jews," and they hung it above Jesus' head while he was slowly suffering and dying. And all this time, at the end of Jesus' life, King Herod's biological son has some political power in this region. The earthly power did pass on, and it didn't include Jesus. But the invitation today is to, again, I invite you to rethink what power looks like. Things aren't always as they appear. Listen to God's voice that leads you to truth and love, and imitate Jesus' way of leading through gentleness, honesty, and love. Because again, friends, love power is the greatest power in the whole earth.